guess I'll go ahead and get started. I wasn't sure if there was going to be a signal. Hi, everybody. My name is Dr. Paul McNeil. I'm presenting the topic of graphical authentication, the other white meat. A little bit about myself. Oh, did it go? No, it didn't. Sorry. Next. All right, there we go. I'm the founder of MusicCityCon, LLC, where we focus on marketing and cybersecurity analytics services, as well as developing usable security solutions. Where did the other white meat come from? Everyone seems to at least be my age. So you remember the big campaign that happened in the late 80s through the 90s of the other white meat to promote eating pork, right, along with chicken in terms of being extremely healthy. There was about $7 million spent on this campaign budget. And debatably or not, there's been a lot of controversy around whether or not this campaign was actually revealing real facts. And that was kind of the reason why I likened graphical authentication to this campaign, because are regarding and your feelings regarding pork and chicken being of the same kind of meat. 20%, there was a 20% increase in pork sales in the United States as a result of this campaign within about 3 or 4 years. And oftentimes, when we hear the conversation around graphical authentication, it seems a little bit too good to be true. And so the question then becomes, is this something that really makes sense in the long term, or is it something that's just being repeated over and over in the research and in academia? So I come from an academic background. I came from the researcher side. Later, I started to play around with actually hacking and doing the penetration and so forth. But at my core, I'm on the analytics side and academia. So I wanted to talk a little bit about how I even got into this space and hopefully show a little bit of the progression. So I actually initially came to Nashville to go to grad school to 100% focus on UX experience. Did my master's in computer science there, and also got into computer science education. And I got the opportunity to go over to Tennessee State University to work on my PhD. And while I was there, I ended up working on applying machine learning techniques to detecting cybersecurity issues. So the project that I worked on was looking at user-triggered behaviors on smartphones, building these probabilistic models, and using those models in order to dynamically test things based on real user information and create these alerts for these targeted malware that we were finding. Near the end of my time there, I started to become very interested in the fact that doing my user studies, despite the fact that on paper or in a survey, a lot of people would say they were very interested in it, there was, as you all know, there was not really, there was a gap between understanding that cybersecurity and being secure is important and actually wanting to be uncomfortable with those situations. And so it started to look at why that was, and it kind of led me to authentication. After graduation, I decided to take some time to do some freelance, and I ended up working in marketing analytics, specifically in like e-commerce. And I noticed that a lot of businesses were doing a large number of sales online without having extremely secure practices. So we all know about SQL injection and so forth and so on, cross-site scripting. And I started to think, why aren't these businesses taking more time to invest in this particular problem set? So these are just a couple of facts that I'm sure we all know. We have about, on average, there's about 5 passwords each person has, but they span this across these 26 accounts. And the reason that we see a lot of this poor password management, same with writing down passwords, sharing passwords, is because it's often difficult for us to remember text-based things. We're image-based people, and it's one of the reasons, if you think about it, when you hand a book to a little kid, it's a picture book and not necessarily War and Peace, right? And then you look at the cost of these data breaches. You look at digital advertising fraud by bots each year, and you wonder, why are smaller businesses, which are most likely to end up going out of business after a breach, not investing more? And a lot of times, it just comes down to lack of resources, or they don't think that it's very important. They'd rather take that security money, put it into marketing or something of that nature. And so that was what kind of got me into graphical authentication. My thought was, is there a way that we can tie in security to these marketing initiatives and these bottom lines very directly? And so I started on like this quest to find out what kind of tools were out there. I also found out that there is a large number of companies that are spending money on password reset or password-related issues of their IT budget each year. And then, of course, you have, again, just employees not really caring too much about the cybersecurity. They may do the training, you may send out all of the emails that you want to send out, but in actuality, at the end of the day, you still can go around and do your checks and find a lot of sticky notes and a lot of reused passwords. Or worse, lost keys and fobs. So what is graphical authentication? Basically, graphical authentication is the use of images or patterns to visually that allows users to visually authenticate themselves. So there are two main types. There's the recall-based, and then there's recognition-based. So for your recall-based, you have your end user has to recall maybe a series of pictures most of the time, whereas in your recognition, the images have to be clicked in the correct order. With recall-based, it's a matter of a pattern. So you see pattern recognition of some kind, or maybe remembering points on a single image. So one of the things that I noticed, again, with the disparity between like what's going on in academia and in industry is just the adoption. So there's a lot, for the last few years, since the early 2000s, there have been research groups like Failsafe, which became a company, that have really been looking into this graphical authentication, but we're not seeing a lot of adoption. And so one of the things that I wanted to propose today, or to just kind of get the conversation going in the community, is why do we have all of this research or these different things pointing to that end, but we're not seeing a lot of industry adoption? Could there be improvements that have been made already? For instance, I know some of the challenges have been with lag times, and we'll talk a little bit about that later on. But in terms of the research, so Failsafe, that's an example of the Failsafe experiment. In this system, they assign a series of faces, and they assign this password to you, and every screen that you get, you click one, you select one image, and then it changes the screen, and you're supposed to be able to recall. They had something above like an 80-something% recall rate after 6 months of the people who had done the study initially coming back. They were still able to recall or recognize the faces. They may not have gotten the order correct, but we were able to see and prove that. Now, Passpoint is something that's a little more familiar to most people, or that methodology. And you can see that on like your Windows 10 graphical login, where you have one image and you choose several points. And then many of us know, the Android pattern matching, which is the swipe and using gestures, remembering your pattern. All right, so I wanted to talk a little bit about these benefits of graphical authentication and some of the challenges that have been presented, and think about those types of solutions that either exist now, or again, start that conversation as to why it's not being more widely adopted in industry and in use. So as you can see here, this chart, and there's vulnerability issues. Many times graphical authentication is not subject to dictionary attacks, not subject to social media engineering because of just the way that it is set up. Now, shoulder surfing, thank you, I can't speak right now, tongue-tied. Shoulder surfing is an attack in which you're just looking over the shoulder, and that seems to often bring pause as to why people would not want to use some kind of graphical authentication. But there have been several techniques, whether it's rotating images, whether it's distributing the click points via some kind of second device or handheld system, creating this multi-factor authentication approach. that have been able to mitigate or completely eliminate that problem. Then, of course, with the keylogger spyware, depending on the implementation, this is still an issue, and then as well as guessing, also an issue. And so one of the things that research has shown is that if you pair graphical authentication as one of your factors of your multi-factor authentication processes, it could do a significant amount to increase or to lower the end user using those unsafe password practices we talked about that end up being so fatal. All right. A few more on the benefits and the challenges. So in terms of challenges, the argument is that there's the screen recording, there's smudge attacks, and there's poor user experiences, as well as we have low user adoption. And so,
can you elaborate on smudge attack?
Sure. So a smudge attack would be, if you think of your phone, if you're unlocking using Android, the grease from your finger can create this, the oily pattern. And so then if you're able to kind of get that through using different techniques, you can kind of figure out what the pattern is. Similar to when you press a keypad and you're able to kind of put a piece of tape over it and get that. So that would be a smudge attack. More on the mobile side. Screen recording, we know that that's something that is also, again, there have been work that shows that having that second factor of authentication or disseminating hidden click points via another email or mobile device can help to alleviate those things. Poor user experience. This was one of the really big issues in terms of the early 2000s, which is slower login times because it takes a while for you to actually click, as well as slower page loads. But now we have things like React and Flutter that are allowing us to be able to, and CDNs that are allowing us to be able to serve these images a little bit faster and be able to make those changes only where they need to be made to kind of mitigate it a little bit. The upsides, though, it's a lot easier for people to remember. There's also, they're not as susceptible to, as we talked before, those text-based attacks. So rainbow tables and things of that nature, it kind of gives that separation. And this is something that I almost put on both, but one of the previous arguments is that the password combinations possible wouldn't be at the same number. But what we're finding is that when implemented correctly, you actually can get a larger, or at least an equivalent, password combination space. So I wanted to look at some of the things that are going on in industry, some of the current products, in terms of multi-factor authentication, and as well as in this graphical authentication space. So Passfaces, which started off as a research project, actually became a company. They got government contracts and have been used in industry with a fair amount of success. One of the issues, though, that is the shoulder surfing. I don't know why I can't say shoulder today. Shoulder surfing is one of the issues, and they focus more heavily on the recognition than on the recall. Many of our other known keys and so forth really require heavily on recall. If you don't have your key fob, you may be out of luck. If you have some kind of voice biometric phase, so forth and so on. But if we look at Google and Microsoft, it's kind of hard to put them. They're almost in the same area. They seem to be using this graphical authentication. Of course, you have to opt in. And so looking at why that adoption is not high, again, it's still really interesting to see because we're seeing two of the big players that are actually starting to incorporate this in their quest to move away from the traditional passwords.
I have a question.
Sure.
About keep re-emphasizing it's not being adopted, people aren't warming up to it, and I do some things at Section 508 compliance, which
Okay.
is basically making electronic information available to the impaired, vision impaired
Yeah.
And I'm wondering how these companies that are creating something that's visual, making it file away compliant so that people who have vision impairment can access and get in and do what they need to do.
That's a really good question, and a very good point. That's something that I have looked into a little bit. So I know that one of the solutions, again, is if you're incorporating that with something like a voice biometric, that would be an option, or even having the person have that second factor be typing. But the reality is not every company or organization would be a good fit for graphical authentication as well, right? And so that's kind of the conversation that I think needs to be had a little bit more, is like what kind of organization does that make sense for? So what jumps to my mind would be maybe an organization that's looking at maybe beefing up their CIAM, allowing people to have more secure passwords in terms of using that graphical analysis, but it's something that's web-based or web portal-based, or perhaps even looking to leverage some of those insights that you can get from having information about your customers in the e-commerce space.
Well, I can tell you, once they implement it, they're going to have a plan for file-away compliance.
Right. Yeah.
So that might be one deterrent. I don't know.
No, that is a very good point, and I think to that end, having some kind of backup fail-safe plan, similar to how when the captchas first came out, you could click. Yeah, some kind of option B, whether it's keyboard or whether it's something where with those images, maybe there are rotating keypad alerts or something like that, or keypad options to choose those spots. So no, that's a very good point, and I would love to talk with you a little bit more offline about that. But, well, we kind of came to that. That was going to be my next thing in terms of what would fit for everyone. And so I think that there is enough evidence that shows that we can actually achieve some kind of security, at least on the equivalent, maybe even a little bit more, depending on how it's used with graphical authentication. But as I don't know your name, sorry, sir?
Call me Tommy.
Tommy? All right. So as Tommy pointed out, though, it may not be the right fit for everyone, and there may still need to be a couple of different adaptations to make this fit for the community at large, but it may be the answer to a lot of problems. And so then this, if you were interested in getting more information or getting in contact with me or getting these slides, you could just text get graphical to 44222, or talk to me afterwards, and I can collect your emails, and that would be wonderful. So if there are any more questions, I know that it's almost lunchtime.
So, just curious about
Sure.
what your research showed, if anything, about contrast between that and biometric
Sure.
forms of authentication.
Sure. So one of the things that I've seen is that it's a little less costly to implement the picture-based as opposed to the biometrics. And so my opinion would be this might be a really good option for someone who's transitioning still, because not everyone is at the maturity level to be able to install all of those biometrics options properly. So maybe like a nice like a half step or nicotine patch, for lack of a better term.
I was also curious about your graph was showing 3 factors of authentication.
Oh.
And I was sitting here going, okay, I'm real familiar with 2-factor, but I'm not quite sure I understand what you mean by 3-factor.
Sure. So 2-factor. So 3-factor would be maybe including some kind of contextual stuff as a requirement in terms of location and time. So you have, who you are, what you know, who you are, what you know, what you have, and then time and location are sometimes considered 4th and 5th factors, or a 3rd factor context. Yeah.
One organization is actually doing, using a smartphone as a form of identity.
Right.
So Microsoft already have password authentication. So
I'm sorry, say it again?
Microsoft already have password authentication.
Yeah.
So you can log into a lot of Microsoft products, get a OIDC token access. That tools not actually
No, that's a really good question. Yes, they do already have that password list. So my thought here would be, again, it depends on the organization. So if you're looking in terms of internally and you can afford that, then that would be, of course, optimal would be to go with something of that nature. If that's a little bit out of your scope, this might be a good option. Also, in terms of websites, web portals, CIAM type of stuff, it's going to be it's going to be interesting to see how those things kind of play out with passwordless via having a device and so forth, getting into shopping carts, things of that nature. And so those types of situations are kind of what I'm seeing this being a solution for, as well as being able to incorporate with like that e-commerce bottom line marketing and analytics insights. Because if you can use that login information or use that attention on that page to increase bottom line revenue, that's a conversation you could have with the CMO, CEO that does kind of move people away from something that's not as safe for that customer-facing technology or site.
Are there usually controls in the account settings for people who are just trying to guess features, basically, to get there, like a lockout, etc., how that works to prevent somebody from just guessing?
Oh, from just guessing?
Yeah.
So, yeah, I believe so. I think you can, I want to say with Windows 10, I know with some of them they do have lockouts similar to passwords, as this gentleman mentioned. Like they do have some reminiscence or some overlap there in terms of lockout and things of that nature for guessing. Yeah. All right. Well, thank you very much for your time.